Welcome to another episode of 11 Warriors Live. I'm your host, Chase Brown, joined as always by our deputy editor, Dan Hope, and our reporter, Andy Anders. Guys, it's been a while since we've been together for an episode of 11 Warriors Live. And honestly, I don't know why we're having this episode. There's not like there's that much to talk about, right? No, of course, there's been so much happening that I don't even know if we're going to be able to fit it into an hour. There's been the transfer portal. Heck, I mean, Ohio State, they ended their season in the Cotton Bowl. We haven't had an episode since then. Then we have the transfer portal. We got guys declaring for the NFL draft. We have all these things happening around Columbus. It's made for quite a busy, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 days for us covering this. And I'm sure for Ohio State fans who have been checking their notifications across our social media channels and just keeping up with everything that is happening around Ohio State. But yeah, overall, how have you guys kind of handled this weekend? I know we've tried to do it collaboratively, but also this news cycle moves so quickly. I feel like we've all just kind of been going and running and trying to do our best to cover this thing. And Dan, you've kind of been at the forefront for us doing a lot of the different things with visits and people coming to campus and all those different things. What's like this past week been like for you?
It's been a whirlwind, man. I mean, it's just, I think we may talk a little bit later, Michelle, about the college football calendar and how it needs to change. But I think my opinions on that have become stronger and stronger over the past week because, I mean, not that we're ones to complain. I mean, the coaches and people who are really involved in this sport have a lot more to complain about than us. But to go, I mean, you think about it, a week ago today, like right now, we, Chase and I, we were out there in Dallas. We're getting ready for Ohio State to play Miami. We're thinking, we could be out in Arizona right now covering a semifinal game. And then the season ends abruptly, the next day. By the time we're even back home, like 10 guys are already in the transfer portal for Ohio State. And now there's just this constant flow of people entering the portal, people transferring elsewhere. It's just a crazy time in college football right now. And, I think that there certainly need to be changes, which, again, we might get into a little bit more later in the show. But it's just a whirlwind time. And, and I think, in 2 or 3 weeks, we might finally have a chance to, like, catch our breath a little bit with the season being over. But certainly not right now with how crazy things are off the transfer portal.
Yeah, that first day when you and I were traveling back from Dallas, Dan, I feel like we owe Andy a bouquet of flowers and edible arrangements. Maybe we'll DoorDash him some food because, man, he was holding down the fort. We were hopping on a flight from the Dallas airport, getting back to Columbus, and there were so many different players that entered the transfer portal. There were a bunch of different news items that came out from Columbus at that time.
I think I joked to you, but before we took off, it was you and some other members of the beat were on our flight, and I told you guys, I said over under 2.5 players enter the portal while we are in flight, and I think you and I think Garrett Hodge and Cam Teague all took the under, and you would have been right, except that we sat on the tarmac for like 45 minutes. So I don't remember the exact players. I think one of them was Logan George, and I think someone else in that time. It would have been 2. And then, like, as we were making our descent, someone else entered the portal. And I had the Wi-Fi on my phone, but they had already told us to put our computer away. So I'm like, Andy, sorry, I'm going to need you to do another one because I can't open my computer right now.
And Andy as well, covering basketball throughout that time too, with the game happening on Tuesday night, or excuse me, Monday night. My days are all mixed up. Now that I'm thinking about this time, I'm like, what day is it?
I don't even know what day it is anymore. The only reason I knew what day it was is because right before we were about to record, the tornado sirens were going off here in Columbus, as they do every Wednesday at noon for those who are not locals.
Well, let's dive into some of the news. There was a few different announcements that came out last night. One that we can kind of kick off the show with is that Carnell Tate declared for the NFL draft. That's not necessarily something that's super surprising. I think we all knew that because of the season that he had had this year for Ohio State, that he had emerged as potentially the number 1 wide receiver in this class, along with Arizona State's Jordan Tyson and USC's Mekhi Lemon. Most of the mock drafts that I'm seeing have Tate coming off the board first, even as a top 5 pick. The highest I've seen him go is number 5 to the New York Giants. I've also seen the Browns be a team that pick him. That it definitely seems like he could be the first Buckeye taken, along in that group with Arvell Reese and Caleb Downs. Those are the three guys that we've seen mocked in the top 10, potentially top 5 picks as those continue to come out. But not necessarily surprising, but also Ohio State, with all the things that are happening in their wide receiver room right now, with Brian Hartline going to USF and a few other transfer portal entries, I do think maybe there was like a 1% chance that people were hoping, could Carnell Tate come back? Could we convince him to take a bigger NIL incentive? But no, he's heading to the NFL. Dan, you were kind of the first person that hopped on the train, if I remember correctly, of like Carnell Tate is the number one receiver in this draft. He's growing into that. Now that you're seeing him make this decision to go to the NFL, what do you expect, I guess, to see from him in the NFL, depending on where he lands?
Yeah, I mean, certainly to me, it was pretty obvious those first few games of a year, but like, yeah, Carnell Tate is going to be a top 20 draft pick. Like, you could just see the steps that he made, from his, sophomore year, being a great player, but really being that third guy in line, overshadowed by Jeremiah and Emeka Egbuka, to then this year really becoming, call him a number 2, but he was really more like a second number 1 receiver for Ohio State. I think he was really, I think in terms of like big plays, he was actually probably Ohio State's best big play guy. And that's no slight at all towards Jeremiah, because he made plenty of big plays too. But I mean, I remember his stats, he, before his injury, like it was something like he had like a long catch, like a 30 or 40 yard catch in pretty much every game. And, there were just so many of those catches for him this year where it's like, he made those really difficult catches look easy, just like the body control, his ability to track the ball in the air. I think you could really see this year that Carnell Tate is a special player. And so certainly I expect that the first round run of wide receivers is going to continue for Ohio State this year. Some of the projections like top 5, I don't know if I'd go quite that far. I mean, would I put him in the same class as a Marvin Harrison Jr. as a prospect? I wouldn't go that far, but I think somewhere, to me, probably in that, top 15 range is where I ultimately see him going, possibly top 10, depending on, which teams really want a receiver in this draft. I think it's probably between him and Arizona State's Jordan Tyson to be the number 1 wide receiver in this draft. So yeah, Carnell Tate could have made a lot of money in NIL if he stayed at Ohio State, but definitely going to make a lot of money going to the NFL. And I think much like we've seen from the likes of Jackson Smith and Jigba and Emeka Egbuka, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Terry McLaurin, you name it, I think Carnell Tate is going to be the next in a long line of Ohio State receivers to go on to do great things in the NFL.
Another thing we're expecting today at some point is an announcement from Caleb Downs on whether he will be declaring for the NFL draft. The expectation has been pretty much all year that he's going to declare for the draft, as in some cases, and I think it might even be a unanimous opinion, that he is the best prospect in this draft. It just hurts him that he plays the safety position rather than a quarterback or a left tackle or a defensive end. But as far as a pure football prospect, there might not be any player better than Caleb Downs in this upcoming draft. If we do kind of, I guess, hear or learn what we expect to be true, Andy, of him entering the NFL draft, could you just speak to the career that he had at Ohio State? I know you covered the Ryan Day press conference after the Cotton Bowl, where he had some great remarks about the impact that Caleb left, not only on the field, but also off the field in the Columbus community. And he'll be leaving, if he does choose to declare, as a 2-time unanimous All-American and one of the best defensive players that Ohio State has had in a long, long time.
Yeah, ever. I would just say ever on that. One of the best defensive players Ohio State has had ever. Certainly in the conversation for best safety, I think a lot of people might say Jack Tatum or Mike Doss. There's other guys in that conversation for the best safety ever to play at Ohio State. I would probably put Caleb Downs ahead of all of them. The athleticism, there's never, I don't think I've ever seen a player with more game knowledge than Caleb Downs has. When you talk to him, when you hear how defensive coordinators that have worked with him talk about him, when you hear how opponents talk about him, his dedication to film study, his preparation is so elite, and you couple it with a freak athlete. Like you have those two things, an incredibly technically sound player with incredible football instincts and knowledge, and the incredible athleticism. You get something special like Caleb Downs. And then to humble himself and involve himself in the Columbus community greatly with what he did to fight hunger in the Columbus area, to fight homelessness in the Columbus area, showing up to Jalen McLean's Red Cross event or Salvation, sorry, not Red Cross, Salvation Army event. I was there. Salvation Army event when he wasn't getting any publicity from it. It wasn't part of his charities, right? But he went and supported his teammate and helped give back to the community. And this is a guy with so much going on. I can tell he's someone who's going to be a successful business person after his playing career is over, which I don't expect to be for a long time. But even now you see him making these relationships and doing his podcast, and you can't say enough about good things about the kid. And like I said, I think he might be the best safety ever to play at Ohio State. I expect him to be even playing the safety position, which is always, not a position you expect to get drafted in the top 5 in the NFL draft. As good as he is, I do expect him to go top 5. Although fingers crossed, I'm hoping with everything that he falls to the Bengals at number 10. That is my dream. It's a pipe dream, but it's my dream.
I'm with you, by the way. I mean, we talked about it before, Carnell, but Caleb Downs, I think Caleb Downs should be a top 5 pick. I mean, the guy, there's really no weakness in his game. Like, this is the time of year for the NFL draft. Everybody will try to poke holes in everybody's game. Like, I don't know what hole you could poke in Caleb Downs' game. Like, he's just a very much a complete safety in every way. Like Andy mentioned, not just because of his physical attributes, but how smart of a football player he is. I mean, I just think there's so many things he could do. There's so many different things you can do with him if you're an NFL defensive coordinator. Matt Patricia just showed you that this past year. I mean, he can be free safety, he can be strong safety. You can put him in the box as a linebacker. I think you could put him out there and, you could put him in the slot. He could play corner. Like, there's so many different things that you can do with Caleb Downs. To me, if I was an NFL team and I needed a defensive difference maker, I'd be very hard pressed to pass up on Caleb Downs. And, I'm sure we'll talk more about this, in April ahead of the draft. But as good as all these, I think Ohio State, if Arvell Reese, Caden McDonald, Caleb Downs all declare for the draft, I think Ohio State could have 5 first-round draft picks. But Caleb Downs is the one I would take first because he's just such a complete player.
Yeah, and Dan, I know you and I talked about this, that with NFL teams, it's great when you have a quarterback with potential upside, an edge rusher with potential upside, any of the positions. It is just very interesting to me that an NFL team would look at Caleb Downs and say, yeah, that guy's an all-pro. Yeah, that guy has the potential to be a future Hall of Famer, and we can do everything with him. Why wouldn't you take that guy with one of your first-round picks? To pass on him and get a risk-reward player that maybe pans out is something that I find a hard time wrapping my mind around when looking at the NFL draft. I also think with Caleb too, and by the way, if this announcement does happen while we are on the live stream, we will let you know, and probably Andy or Dan will be bumping away for a second to make sure that we have that up on our website and our socials. But I think about too the Caleb Downs, even the fact that he became a Buckeye is such an incredible thing, right? His defensive backs coach at Alabama, Javaris Robinson, ends up going to Georgia. Georgia becomes the front runner to land Caleb Downs in his transfer portal recruitment. And then Texas also emerged as a player. There were some other Power 5 schools that definitely had their bids on who was unanimously agreed upon was the number 1 transfer prospect. And I can remember where I was when Caleb Downs committed. It was a Friday night. I'm in my apartment late at night, probably after 9 p.m., closer to 10. And it's kind of just comes out of the blue. Like, holy crap, Ohio State did it. Ohio State landed Caleb Downs. And you knew that that was such a significant boost to a team that was reloading the clip, as they were saying, with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and Tyleik Williams and Denzel Burke on that defensive side, so many other guys as well. But you knew that adding Caleb Downs into that defense made it championship caliber, even more than it already was. And it paid off for Ohio State in the very first year. Unfortunately, it did not for them in 2025 with that loss to Miami in the Cotton Bowl. So we have those two guys with their news, either Tate already declaring, Caleb Downs, the potential for him to declare at some point today. But we also have a bunch of news, even more news than we would. I don't know. Also hard for me to wrap my brain around that there are almost 20 Buckeyes who have entered the transfer portal, scholarship players, not even counting the walk-ons who have entered, that Ohio State will have to replace in some form or fashion with their high school recruits coming in the 2026 class or transfer portal additions this offseason. I did want to ask you guys, as we kind of unpack what the heck is happening in Columbus, it probably is a good thing to start talking about which of these departures have significance on Ohio State's 2026 team. So I do want to kind of kick around that conversation. Dan, as you look at Ohio State's transfer portal entrants, which of those Buckeyes do you see having their departure be the most significant impact on the 2026 roster?
I think there's several we could go with, but I think one that certainly just sticks out in my mind is probably the most recent one with Quincy Porter entering the transfer portal on Tuesday night is the departures at wide receiver, because you think about how much we've talked in recent years. I mean, we just talked about Carnell Tate, how loaded this receiver room has been. We've talked so much in recent years about how deep Ohio State's receiver room is, how they've got, 5 or 6 guys who could be stars in that receiver room. And suddenly that's not the case right now with Ohio State's wide receiver room. With Quincy Porter entering the transfer portal, with Mylan Graham entering the transfer portal, Bryson Rogers entering the transfer portal. Good news is Jeremiah Smith did assure people on Tuesday he's not going anywhere. He will be back next season. It's expected that Brandon Inniss will be back for another season. So Ohio State should have 2 returning starters at wide receiver. But after that, there's a lot of unknowns in that wide receiver room right now. Now, I do believe that Chris Henry Jr. is someone who's going to come in and play immediately as a freshman. I would not be shocked if he starts as a freshman. I think he has that kind of talent. I'm not going to say he's quite Jeremiah Smith, but I do think he has that talent to, if not start, push and play an immediate role as a freshman. But other than that, I mean, you're bringing back now a lot of guys who really didn't play this last season. And so Ohio State, during the Brian Hartline era, never brought in a scholarship transfer receiver. That has to change now, because right now there's just no experience behind Jeremiah Smith and Brandon Inniss at the top of that depth chart. So I think bringing in at least 1, if not 2 transfer receivers now is going to be a necessity for Ohio State. DeAndre Moore is someone that we have eyes on, former Texas wide receiver who visited Ohio State over the weekend. We'll see if other transfer targets emerge there at wide receiver. But, I think it's stark to see the departures from the receiver room just because of how loaded that room has been in recent years. But I think it's a reality of 2 things. 1, Brian Hartline's gone. And 2, college football is changing, and it's just going to become harder to keep a guy like a Quincy Porter who wants to start, who wants to get starter money in NIL. And you've got to give Jeremiah Smith a lot of money to keep him on the roster. You've got to give Chris Henry Jr. a lot of money to sign with Ohio State. And there's only so much to go around. There's only so much money to go around. There's only so much touches to go around. And a guy like a Quincy Porter, who I think in the past, it's like you figure, okay, this next year he's going to step in, he's going to play some. Maybe the year after that, he becomes a starter, the heir apparent to Jeremiah Smith there. Now he might say, well, you know what? I don't want to wait my turn. I want to go somewhere else where I can go be the star of a receiver room right now.
While Dan was speaking, Caleb Downs did officially declare for the NFL draft. Andy got our post up on the website. Andy, I'm going to ask you, as I get some more things up on the website, with the transfer portal and how Dan just described the wide receiver position, I know that you've also taken an interest to the defensive backs, those who would guard the wide receivers on the other side of the ball. Ohio State lost a couple of guys there. What do you think the impact will be losing players like Aaron Scott Jr., Bryce West in that room?
Yeah, as far as impact, I mean, kind of in wait and see mode, right? Because they're clearly targeting other corners to bring in, and they were targeting other corners to bring in, like Auburn's Kayin Lee, who has definitely strong ties to Ohio State from his recruitment. But they were targeting these guys before even they got the Aaron Scott news. The Bryce West news came earlier. Other cornerback who could have, those are both guys who could have played next year in my estimation. I really thought, honestly, that after Bryce West transferred, Aaron Scott was in prime position to compete for a starting job next year. But then you see they're recruiting other transfer cornerbacks, and I guess it makes sense why Aaron Scott would leave in that case. But it's a real concern because if they, they still got to add that guy. And if they don't add that guy, you have Jermaine Matthews Jr., who still hasn't made a decision whether he's staying or leaving Ohio State. I think we probably all lean that he's going to stay, but you don't know. Kevin Sanchez, who's rising up as a sophomore 5-star prospect, got some playing time this year, still has some things to prove, but I think you feel good about a talented dude rising into his second year. But that third guy, it's like, who? They have some decent freshmen coming in. You have Miles Lockhart, who was recruited as sort of that slot corner that Lorenzo Styles Jr. is leaving, but it didn't seem like he was close to being ready this season. So like whoever's going to be that third cornerback is pretty unclear. You need to add a guy to be that third cornerback. That's why, to me, it's probably the biggest position I look at in the portal and say Ohio State absolutely needs a guy here, because I could at least tell you, I could at least give you some names. Like Chris Henry Jr. could be the third receiver if needed with Jeremiah and Brandon. With Tegra transferring out, as bad as the offensive line did the last 2 games, you still have clearly identified guys who would start at all 5 positions. Maybe you don't want to settle for that, but you do have guys that would start at all 5 positions. Like, I just don't know who is even close to starting caliber among the cornerbacks outside of Jermaine and Devin Sanchez. So to me, that makes it the biggest portal need for Ohio State, and that's the impact of Aaron Scott and Bryce West leaving, is that now you're in a position where you really need to go get a third starting caliber cornerback.
Well, yeah, I can think of one other position where I could not name anyone to start right now. I think Chase might talk about that one.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm going with the kicker spot. Jackson Corville was a guy that transferred in from Ball State a year ago, entering the 2025 season. But he decides to re-enter the transfer portal and look for a new place to kick in 2026. And with Jaden Fielding exhausting his eligibility, Ohio State currently doesn't have a kicker on the roster. And so that has to be a place. And this is a conversation I think we can transition into, is where is Ohio State's biggest position of need? I do think that we've already addressed 3 of them. Certainly there are more, but kicker is at the top of the list because there simply isn't a kicker on the roster. And Ohio State is not a program, especially one coming off of a season where Jaden Fielding's kicks, and particularly the missed kicks, cost them in their 2 biggest games against Indiana and against Miami in some form or fashion. Ohio State needs to get an established kicker from the transfer portal, in addition to probably adding one from the high school ranks. The problem is, however, there aren't really a bunch of kickers that have great statistics or great potential and promise in the transfer portal right now. I looked through the list of the kickers that are currently in there, and there's a guy from Bowling Green who's made a couple of really big kicks. He's from 55, 56 yards. There's a couple of guys from the Big Ten who have great accuracy, but their distance really isn't where you would like to see it. Ohio State did offer a prospect in Jacobo Echeverria from the high school ranks, but even him, his kicks were long of 41. Like, you would like to see an Ohio State kicker at least be somewhat reliable from the 50-yard range. And that has been something that has lacked for Ohio State in years past, quite frankly, for a long time. I don't know if we would say that, looking back on Ohio State's history at the kicker position, that when they would trot out for 50-plus yard kicks, that you felt very confident that kicker would make them at least somewhat accurately, right? We're not looking for a kicker when they run out for a 50-plus yarder in the college level to make those 100% of the time. But you'd certainly like to have some sort of confidence that when they step on the field, that kick could go through the uprights. And so that's where I'm looking at. I think Ohio State, they certainly made a push for David Alano from Illinois, but that is a transfer that ends up going to Texas A&M. There's a few more guys that maybe they could explore, but there's not really a clear solution or a clear answer for where Ohio State could go in the portal to find their next kicker. So that's where I'm looking. Dan, is there another position where you think Ohio State needs to address in the transfer portal that's at probably the higher of the needs across the roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about the top three. I put kicker at the top of the list because, like I said, there is no kicker on the roster. And I do think that's an area Ohio State needs to be more aggressive in than it's been in the past in terms of trying to add top talent at that position. So I do put that number one. That's not even really merely a reaction to Jaden Fielding missing his last two kicks of the year. It's the fact that he's out of eligibility. Jackson Corville's gone. It's non-negotiable. They need a kicker unless they're just going to bring in a couple unsigned high school guys. Like, you need a kicker. Ideally, you want one that's proven he can do it at a high level. I mean, there was one interesting name that just entered the portal minutes ago, I believe. His name's Trey Butkowski from Pittsburgh. He, as a freshman, had 20 of 23 field goals. Now, granted, his long was 47. His free misses all came from over 40. So, the range part may be a question there, but that's a name I'll be interested to see. Does Ohio State pursue him with, his accuracy numbers that he had from this past season? I think after kicker, as Andy talked about, I put corner next because right now I don't think there is a great third option unless you think a Jay Timmons or Jordan Thomas can come in and start right away as a freshman, which is a really tough thing to do. I mean, we saw Devin Sanchez have growing pains this season, and he was a top 10 overall prospect. So I think they very much need, I'd say not one, but two veteran corners to come in and bolster the depth of that room because of the losses of Aaron Scott and Bryce West of a portal. I put wide receiver third because, again, the depth. You have Jeremiah Smith, you have Brandon Ennis, you have Chris Henry Jr. coming in, but there's a big question right now about who that second wave of guys would be. So I think you need one or two veteran guys who can come in to bolster that room around those guys. And then I think the next position you look at is defensive end because, and some of that is going to depend on whether Kenyatta Jackson Jr. stays for his fifth-year senior season or enters the portal. But I think even if he stays, they still have a need there at defensive end because you look at this past season, we all went into the year. I think we all thought going into the year, there was going to be a real rotation at defensive end. And that simply didn't materialize. Bo Atkinson did not make the impact he was expected to make transferring in from North Carolina. CJ Hicks ended up redshirting, not being a factor. We did see some good things from Zion Grady. So I certainly think Zion Grady is someone who's going to be in the conversation to either be a starter or be that first defensive end off the bench next season and play significant snaps. But ideally, you'd really want to have four defensive ends who you trust, who can play significant snaps, who can rotate and keep those starters fresh. So I think there is a big need for a high-level pass rusher to come in opposite Kenyatta Jackson. Certainly, there's a clear target there. Chaz Coleman was at Ohio State on Tuesday, making a visit to Columbus. Ohio State battling LSU for his commitment. He's been pretty much the clear top target for Ohio State in the portal since he announced in December he was going to enter the portal. He's an Ohio guy, flashed a lot of upside as a freshman at Penn State. So I think he's certainly a guy who would fill that need if Ohio State is able to get him. But Ohio State also going to have to keep its eye out on other options because, I think theoretically you could add two defensive ends. I think if Kenyatta Jackson stays, you probably only need to add one, but I do think there is a need to add one.
It seems to, Andy, from there, if you go beyond those positions, it's not that Ohio State necessarily needs more players or needs more depth, but it would be nice to have. With the offensive line, Ohio State should probably, I would say should have all of their five starters, save for Tegra, back, or so I should say four starters back next season. But then, as we saw, Gabe Van Sickle and Josh Padilla emerge at those right guard spot last season or at the end of last season. The offensive line is in a spot where you don't necessarily need to bring in a starter. Depth would be helpful. Same thing with the linebacker spot. You would think that Peyton Pierce will emerge, being Ohio State's number 3 linebacker from this past season, expecting that Arbel Reese would probably go to the NFL draft. Sonny Styles is headed that way after graduating from Ohio State. Also behind Peyton Pierce, you have guys like Riley Pettijohn and TJ Alford, Garrett Stover. Like, there are guys who are in those rooms that can expect to take a step forward, but you also wouldn't, shoo away anyone that wants to come play for Ohio State and add depth in those spots.
Yeah, I wouldn't just call it depth. I'd call it look for upgrades, and that's what Ohio State has done, trying to recruit Rasheem Biles from Pitt. Some other guys they've been involved with at linebacker. I think it looks like they're looking for a starter there. On the offensive line, haven't seen as much of that yet. But after how bad that unit performed these last 2 games, I think you would like to see them go out and try to get an upgrade. I mean, Gabe Van Sickle had a really bad first half against Miami, and Miami attacked that right side pretty relentlessly. Do I expect a lot of those guys to take steps next year? Probably, but also some of them didn't feel like they took steps from 2024. Tegra being one of them, who had a pretty good playoff run and then followed it up with, being consistently the weakest part of Ohio State's offensive line, calling what like it is. And so I would be aggressive if I were Ohio State about if there's guys, and offensive line is the hardest position to hit on in the portal. It's the hardest position, in my opinion, because it's always at a premium. Everyone wants offensive linemen. There's always a shortage on offensive linemen. It's the same thing in the NFL, right? It's like offensive linemen are the hottest commodity, and there's always a shortage of them in free agency. It's the same way in the transfer portal, right? Like you have guys like Wisconsin's Joe Broner would be good to go after. Was an All Big Ten honorable mention guard for them last year. But I really think they should be aggressive about trying to upgrade the offensive line position. And it seems like they're already being aggressive about trying to get a bona fide starter with big-time experience. Another example they just recently have started pursuing is Christian Aliagro. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that last name, also from Wisconsin. A guy with multiple years of starting experience, had really an incredible stretch to open this season, but then broke his arm. And the last few games after he came back from that injury, he wasn't the same player. I imagine after that gets healed up, he can be a really impactful guy. So Ohio State is really pursuing, it seems, even though I like the linebacker tandem potentially next year of Peyton Pierce and Riley Pettijohn, it does seem like they're pursuing someone who's a more bona fide starter to come in and really solidify that position for them. So in both cases, I think it's clear Ohio State is seeking an upgrade at linebacker, and they should seek upgrades on the offensive line if they're out there. But you also have to be good on those evaluations, because they tried to upgrade the offensive line last year with Ethan Anianwa, and he ended up not being a factor this season at all. So, you got to be on point with the evaluations, but I'd be aggressive about attacking offensive line upgrades potentially, and they're already out there seeking linebackers.
And we haven't also mentioned Ohio State's defensive tackle depth. They add a guy like John Walker from UCF, but the whole conversation last year as we entered the season was, is Ohio State going to have any depth at defensive tackle? And Caden McDonald emerges as a unanimous All-American, but there is a chance that he ends up going to the NFL draft as well, as a guy that has become a first-round pick. He could be a first-round pick in this upcoming 2026 NFL draft. You have Edric Houston coming back, but Tywan Malone exhausts his eligibility. So who's going to be behind those guys? You're hoping that some of the younger, more inexperienced players can make a move up the depth chart. But that's kind of the conversation that we were having last year going into 2025, or going in from this summer, was who's going to emerge in that defensive tackle room. The last spot that I would point out as well is the tight end spot. Depending on what Max Clare decides to do with his future, does he come back? Great. Ohio State would love to have him. But if he ends up declaring for the NFL draft, all of a sudden you're looking at Max Clare's gone and Will Kazmarek is gone because he's exhausted his eligibility. So your top 2 tight ends, you have Bennett Christian coming back as sort of the veteran leader in that room, but then you have Junior and Max LeBlanc, and then Nate Roberts emerging in that sophomore class along with Brody Lennon, and one freshman coming in. And Nick Lauder, that's not necessarily like, we talked about this tight end room being one of the best in America this past season, but then you kind of look at it now and you're like, oh, Ohio State might need to explore like continuing to bolster that room in some form or fashion. I know they're excited about Mason Williams coming from Ohio and his potential to be a blocking threat similar to Will Kazmarek, and maybe even show off some of his receiving skills. But that is also a position that you might see Ohio State continue to explore options. That doesn't leave us with very many positions that Ohio State isn't exploring upgrades, guys. Like it pretty much feels like they're certain about Julian Sand as the quarterback. Bo Jackson's going to be a sophomore next year with Isaiah West. I mean, that might even be a position where they look to add a veteran talent similar to a CJ Donaldson from 2025. But you got Julian Sand, you got Jeremiah Smith, and those are the two players that you're feeling really, really confident about going into 2026. Everybody else, I think they feel good, but if you're looking for upgrades, I think you're probably looking for it across the board. Would you guys agree for that?
I mean, it's the sign of a times where I think Ohio State has reason to add transfers at every single position. I mean, even quarterback, we know Ryan Day in the past has always talked about he wants to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks with Lincoln Keenholz entering the transfer portal. They have Julian Sand, they have Tavian St. Clair, they have Luke Fahey coming in, but I would expect they're going to look to add a 4th quarterback like a Eli Brickhandler, Tristan Gebbia, Chris Chugunov, Gunnar Hoke type. They offered Jackson Potter, who was at Washington State the other day. We'll see if any other names emerge there. But yeah, I mean, I think across the board, I mean, we haven't mentioned punter. I think there's probably a lot of people out there saying punter, why are you guys talking about punter? Like they could use an upgrade at punter. At the very least, I think some competition to come in and push Joe McGuire after losing Nick McLarty. So, I mean, really it's across the board. And I think it really speaks to how college football has changed and the reality that, even last year, like there was a lot of talk from Ryan Day about like, we're going to be very selective. We're just going to fill holds. We're not going to bring in guys unless we have a need. I think that those days are kind of over, at least unless until the transfer portal gets reined in some way, because I think there's just too much movement now from year to year. And you look at what a team like Indiana has done. I mean, they basically built their entire roster on the transfer portal, and they're the best team in the country. Like, it's a new age in college football. The reality is as good as it is to like want to be able to develop through the high school ranks, and it's still always going to be an important part of roster building in college football. But unfortunately, when you have guys like Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham and Aaron Scott and Bryce West who leave when they're on the cusp of becoming bigger players for your team, now you don't have a choice but to go and fill holes through the transfer portal. And I think, it used to be, until the transfer portal really became a thing over the last few years, it was like you kind of went into a season saying, well, we're going to take our lumps with some of these inexperienced guys. Like, we're going to let them work through it. Now, if you want to win a national championship, you got to go get guys who can go fill those holes right now. And so there has to be a more aggressive approach now of not like, oh, we think this guy might be ready for the job next year. Like, unless you're fully confident, I think that's like where like the linebacker conversation goes. Like, I think we probably all think Peyton Pierce and Riley Pettijohn could be a really good linebacker tandem for Ohio State next year. But neither of those guys have ever started a game. There's not a linebacker on the roster other than Ty Howard at the FCS level who's started a game in college. So that's why they're looking for a guy like a Christian Allegro, because there's just not any proven commodities in that room. And I think that's kind of a reality now, where it's like when the transfer portal is what it is now, and you're a team that's in the business of competing for national championships, can you really afford to just say, well, we think this guy is going to be really good next year when he hasn't played, if there's somebody out there who's already shown he can be really good at the Power 4 level? I think there's a lot more of those kind of conversations having now. And as a result, it's like, even as of a couple of years ago, when it was like Caleb Downs and them coming in, I think it was still more specifically targeting needs. It was more specific, like, okay, we need this, 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 and this. Whereas I think now it's more like we need a little bit of everything.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have done this. You probably have. Ohio State's 2026 schedule is no joke. Like, to your point, Dan, it's becoming even more pressing that Ohio State add guys that have in-game experience, that have proven production, Because let me just rattle off these games for you for Ohio State's 2026 schedule. They open against Ball State at home. Then can I interest you a road game at Texas with Arch Manning coming back? They'll have one final non-conference game against Kent State. And then the rest of these games that I rattle off are not in order. We don't have the date and the kickoff times for them. But here's what we know. Home games against Brett Bielema in Illinois, Maryland, a home game at Michigan, which will be at the end of the year. I guess we do know that. A home game against Northwestern. Chip Kelly, new offensive coordinator. Aiden Childs, new quarterback for Northwestern as well. And a home game against Oregon, who is always good, is in the college football playoff semifinals, could potentially win a national championship this year. Their road games are at Indiana, Kurt Signetti. Can I interest you in that? At Iowa, at Kinnick Stadium. Gotta believe that's going to be a night game. You know, that's going to be a real tough environment. Nebraska and USC on the road. All of those games, like I got people texting me, guys, like they're like, Ohio State's going 9-3 next season. And I'm like, it's not entirely out of the question that Ohio State loses 3 of those games. Would you like to think that Ohio State is still going to be one of the best teams in college football with Julian Saint at quarterback and Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver? Yes. But even a great team has a potential to lose 1 or 2 of those. And depending on if Ohio State enters one of those games not on their A game, they could potentially lose a third, similar to, you know, Texas this year with all the expectations they had of Arch Manning coming in and being the guy, that defense being as good as it was. They still ended up losing 3. So it adds to the pressing nature of Ohio State needing to find upgrades when they are available and needing to capitalize with their roster building. Andy, it looks like you have something that you want to say. I do want to give you the floor for a second if you want to talk about Ohio State's maybe urgency for adding some upgrades in the portal.
Yeah, honestly, it's going off what Dan said, right? It's the new age of college football. And, you know, we can go into later how, you know, this calendar is really messed up and how
you can do it right now. Tell me what you would change, Andy. I'm curious. I think that we need
the first thing is, and Dan and I and you have talked about this, like there needs to be an acknowledgement that these guys are not normal students. We have to stop structuring the calendar around the academic year. It doesn't make sense anymore. It just doesn't in the modern day to have, while the playoffs are still going on, right after seasons are ending, to open the portal immediately, to have the high school like cycle wrapping up pretty much on early signing day while teams are making preparations for their college football playoff games, their postseasons, all the calamity that goes on there. Dan, I think, has proposed a great idea in this vein of shortening the regular season to 11 games, moving it up to week 0, where week 0 is now, right? So you started a week earlier. It's a week shorter. That gives you 2 extra weeks. And then you play conference championship game weekend. You have maybe all the conference plays a game that's like set where the conference championship game is played, but then you have like the third best team playing a lower ranked team. You could have college football playoff spots up for grabs in those if you wanted to, if you had automatic qualifiers. And that's going to push the entire calendar up to where you could maybe have some of this stuff. But the transfer portal window needs moved to just a more reasonable time of the year. Even like later in January would be better. You know, and again, I get that there's academic hurdles to clear with that, but these guys are not normal student athletes. In the modern days of online classes and things you can do to catch people up, I don't think it would be that far out of the realm of possibility to just move it to the end of January, maybe even early February, to actually give some teams some time to see NFL draft decisions get made, know where their roster is going to be at for next year. Guys, proper time to evaluate and make the best decisions for their future. And maybe we need to go to a cap. I'm all for player agency, but maybe there does need to be a cap on how many times you can transfer. The one-time transfer exception was a decent rule. I think maybe 2 is somewhere that you could get 2 transfers for your entire college career, and that's it. Like, you know, there's the grad transfer stuff, all the stuff we've had in the past. I think probably like 2 transfers for your entire career is enough. That's just my opinion on the matter.
You
So
don't
that's
think
all the
guys-
calendar stuff.
You don't think guys should play at 5 different schools in 5 years?
Yeah, no, I think that might be. I don't think that's good for anybody. I don't think it's good for the player. I don't think it's good for the teams. Obviously,
I'm sure
it's
that
not
those
good
guys
for
playing at
fans.
5 different schools in 5 years are making great progress toward an academic degree.
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, great progress academically. Great progress toward a potential NFL career. I'm sure those guys are just doing swimmingly. Yeah, and fan connection too. Like I don't think right now college football is at such a peak in viewership with this round of college football playoffs, and this novelty of the 12 team is still here. Like, well, where in year 2 of it, maybe it's going to expand to 16 or even further in the future. But to me, this long term is something that can hurt the sport because fans aren't developing the connection to the players as much anymore. Like how crazy the portal has gotten. You don't get the chance to sit and watch Quincy Porter develop and see where he's going to go in a couple of years. You're constantly hiring mercenaries. I saw a stat the other day 3 out of the 4 teams in the college football playoff are more than 50% transfers. Like, this is, I don't think, the best way to have fans develop a connection to their teams in the long term, which is why I just think we need to put something. It's not like an urgent thing where college football is going to fall apart. The wheels are going to go off the wagon in 2 years if they don't fix this. But I do think you need to fix it soon because that is going to start to happen in the long term. Like you're going to see a long-term decline in interest from some people. And lastly, like Dan said, this is how you do have to acknowledge the reality of it if you're a football program, a football team. And I think like how the rest of this portal cycle plays out for Ohio State is going to be very important for the future of the program. I do actually have faith that they're going to land the people they need to get, or at least mostly address the concerns they have, because Ryan Day has shown in the past like this. Sometimes patience pays off with this stuff. You look at what happened in the 2024 transfer portal cycle, how long it took before they landed the key pieces to that national championship run. Caleb Downs didn't commit until more than 2 weeks after the transfer portal closed. Like the window closed, I should say, for notification. Like sometimes this stuff does take a while to play out and it's hard to have that patience. I do think Ohio State realizes, and that's why you've seen such an exodus compared to previous years of players from their roster. They've had some honest I think they've had some honest conversations behind the scenes and realized this is how you have to construct a roster now. Getting veteran guys, spending your NIL dollars in those places instead of using it on retention of some players that you don't know if they're going to play next year, really. So it's just such a shifting landscape still. The changes, like they've just kept coming and coming over the past 7 years since the transfer portal first became a thing back in 2018. And I am really, it's going to be a very curious class to see exactly who all Ohio State ends up getting.
I'd like to add a couple of thoughts on that because, we certainly talked a lot about the calendar stuff recently. And I think, a couple of things to your point, like, I think I very much agree that like the portal should happen after the season is over. I also think like there's kind of been this thing, and it's something like a lot of coaches have pushed for, of like, they want to have their roster set like in January. To me, I don't feel like that should need to be the case. Like, I know some people might bristle up the idea of like using the NFL as a model, but the NFL is the most popular and successful sports league by far for a reason. The NFL does a phenomenal job of giving people like us a lot to talk about for 12 months out of a year, because there's always something going on in the NFL calendar. And I think for college football, I think they'd be smart to model their calendar that way. To me, transfer portal can happen February, March, whatever. Yeah, that probably means they have to wait until the end of the academic semester to transfer, like to actually go to their new schools. To me, like that's probably how it should be. I mean, Ross Bjork has talked about that with the way that the financial structures are with these new revenue sharing contracts, if that's what makes the most sense, because they typically run from like June to June. If you talk about, the whole regular students thing, like regular students, how many regular students transfer schools in January? Most of them, if they change schools, are doing it after the spring semester. So to me, I think what makes the most sense for college football long-term is You move the transfer portal out to sometime in the spring, winter, spring. I think you should move the signing day back to February. Like, I think the whole early enrollee thing, it has its benefits for guys, but there's also a part of me that's like, is it really a good thing for these guys long term to have them cut their senior year of high school short? Like, should we maybe just let kids be kids? And then I think all goes along with that is you change what spring practices are now and you move them to like May. That way you can get all your high school guys on campus. You can get all your transfers on campus and practice with your entire roster without having to rush all of it into this very short time frame while the season is still going on. I think this idea of we got to do everything in December and January when the season starts in September, like to me, there has to be a better way of doing this. So the good news is a lot of people in college athletics agree. So I think there are certainly going to be changes, hopefully in time for next year. But yeah, I think, college football is at an inflection point right now where I think so much changed in such a short amount of time. And I mean, Gene Smith used to talk about this a lot, about how like all this stuff, NIL and all of it, there was such a emphasis on like wanting to put guardrails around it. And then nobody could agree on what to do. So then the courts forced their hand and everything just happened and there were no guardrails. And that's why we are where we are now with the transfer portal. And, personally, like I personally think the one-time transfer exception was a good rule. Like I think transferring once without boundaries, like I think, it was definitely a good change to get rid of like the first time you transfer, you have to sit out a year. I think everyone should be able to transfer once without penalty. I think once you transfer multiple times, there probably should be some kind of deterrent from that, because I mean, again, like you talk about the NFL, like there's contracts in the NFL. Like you can't just go and change teams whenever you want. Like you get paid a lot of money, but you have to honor a contract to a team. And I think that it's only fair that when schools are paying the kind of money that they are paying to these players now, that there should be some kind of two-way commitment. So I think ultimately we're going to have to get to a point of collective bargaining in college sports to where there are real contracts between colleges and athletes. And that is going to take, to Andy's point, an acknowledgement that a lot of academic people are not ready to make yet, that these guys are not regular students. I don't know if that means they'll be classified as employees, but there is going to have to be some kind of acknowledgement at some point that these guys are not regular students, because they're not. I mean, regular students pay to go to school. College football players, some of them are now getting paid millions of dollars to go play for schools. So it's just they're just not, for better or for worse, they're just not. That doesn't mean that academics don't still matter. That doesn't mean that getting a degree should not still be an emphasis for these players. But it's just the reality of a situation that, especially at big schools like Ohio State, transfer decisions are very rarely being made because of academics. They're being made because of football reasons. And so I think there has to be some acknowledgement of that in terms of how these things are structured going forward.
Man, you guys are lucky this isn't a Notre Dame podcast. They'd get on you about your academic talk.
I absolutely think that getting a degree is still important, because a lot of college football players are not going to go play in the NFL.
Yep.
I think what both Andy and I are saying is this current system is not helping guys academically. People transferring in the middle of the academic year is not helping them academically. Like, I think that's the thing. Like, to me, one of the benefits, I think, of moving spring practice to May is then you could basically say, okay, the spring semester, this is the time you focus on academics, because you're so busy in the fall. Most guys are taking more classes in the spring than they are in the fall. So to me, like, I would honestly propose that there should be limits, much like in the NFL, of how much coaches can even do with players in the spring. Like, I think there should be limits in the spring on how many mandatory workouts you can have. I think that should be players' time to focus on academics, focus on life stuff. And then you get through that spring semester, you get into the summer. That's when you really start focusing on your build up to the season. Give these guys a few months off. I mean, not off to where they do nothing, but like give them a few months, like real, because especially now of how late the playoff is stretching. I know, as Andy agreed, like I think we probably would all agree the season should probably be ending closer to New Year's Day than it is now. But like, it was a big thing for Ohio State last year of like they had to push spring practice back because the normal spring practice date would have been like 6 weeks after they played in a championship game. So to me, like give players more time off in like January, February, March, and then really kind of ramp things up more around May.
I have to believe that coaches would be on board for that too, considering that they work literally 11 months of the year and only get about a 3.5 week window in July where they can't do anything, and even then, some of them are probably still working, right? They're probably at home cutting together some things for their playbook or some video or something like that because it becomes their life, this coaching thing. And I know that in the NFL, there's certainly a lot more built around coaches having some more of that work-life balance that everybody's craving and everyone's always searching for. I do think that one last note on this conversation, I think that to make these changes, college football needs to get to a place where they have some sort of leadership structure that exists outside of the NCAA. And Ryan Day has been very vocal about this in the past. His opinion is that it should model very similar to kind of how the United States government operates, right? There's a president, the executive branch. There's also the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then you have the Supreme Court. Like, do you have these checks and balances that exist in the sport that is becoming, already is the second most popular sport in America behind the NFL? If we're to make those two separate things, we have the NFL, we have college football. They are the most popular. They have the most eyes. It probably shouldn't come down to a singular commissioner making these decisions. Can we come up with some structure, though, where there is a commissioner? Maybe you have a group of all the athletic directors across the 134 FBS schools, and then you have a group of all 134 FBS coaches, and maybe you throw in the presidents for those schools as well, and come up with some system where there is checks and balances to help incorporate all the different aspects of what makes the modern student athlete. Can they find some definition that is agreeable upon all of those parties and move forward with a structure that benefits everyone involved? If I had to give you my confidence level that will happen, it's not very high, but I do think that that's probably something they need to explore for there to finally be some sort of guardrail around NIL and the transfer portal and this calendar, that everything is just very frenetic, and to find some sort of peace amidst all of it, they need to find some sort of structure from the top down that can eventually cause real change. But we've been going for about an hour. I do want to ask maybe one or two questions from our chat. We have quite a bit of people on our YouTube and our Facebook. We also have a couple of people who have submitted questions in our forum. We did answer a couple of them by talking about the transfer portal and then also the college football calendar. But there are some questions about Ohio State's philosophy, and that might also overlap to some of where they will attack in the transfer portal. What do you guys think? This question comes from Matt64 about Ohio State's game plan in the Cotton Bowl. Do you think that there will be some changes in the way maybe the game is called aggressively on offense? Or do you think that Ohio State will maybe have some more of the same this year? They say that the game plan for most of the year just baffles them. Is that kind of how you guys feel about Ohio State's game plan for the year?
Well, I think, you go ahead, Andy.
Okay, yeah. I don't know about for the year. I think there was a time when the methodical pace served them. Like you need to keep guys healthy for a season you hope is 16 games long, right? Like, I imagine that's mainly what this conversation is about. What Matt 64 is referring to is kind of the slow pace that Ohio State played with a lot of times. In the second half, it worked for them against Miami in some respects. I mean, the offense woke up a lot in the second half, and especially had a long drive that went for a touchdown. Now, do you want to put the foot more on the gas pedal in that situation when you're trailing with a limited amount of time left? Yes, I would say that's something that they should look at in the offseason. But mainly with the Cotton Bowl game plan, it's hard to do anything. And I mean anything when your offensive line can't block. That's just what it comes down to for me. You're not going to move the ball if you can't hold up at the line of scrimmage. And they did better in the second half. They did. That unit did. I want to give some credit there. But like 5 sacks, Julian Saint under constant pressure whenever he dropped back for anything more than a screen. Then lo and behold, you throw a screen one time and it goes for a pick 6. Like, you can say more screens. You can say this stuff. Miami's going to sit on it if you do it too much, and plays like that. Like, screens mainly work when the defense isn't expecting them. And so when you're just getting beat at the line of scrimmage like that, I honestly think Ohio State had some good play calls in place. They just didn't execute because the offensive line wasn't executing. So that's where I pin. I guess it's not about blame, but that's where I pin a lot of it for the Miami loss. Is like they just couldn't hold water against that Miami defensive line. And that made it hard to make any play call be successful again in that first half before they started playing better in the second half, particularly in the run game. And maybe they should have gotten to that inside run stuff a little sooner in the first half. But it also came with a change at right guard where Josh Padilla started playing instead of Gabe Van Sickle. And I wonder if the evaluation was off on that as to who should have started in that game. But as far as the game plan goes, as I've sat with it longer, I definitely criticized it coming off the game and not really seeming to have a plan to attack that pressure that Miami brought up front. But at the same time, I think there were some calls in place that they tried to get to, and it just backfired because Miami knew they had the advantage up front and to look for the screens in these things. So, yes, there were definitely areas of the game plan I felt fell short against Miami, but I mainly think that it's just hard to get anything done when you can't do anything up front.
I do think moving forward, though, that I do think that, Ohio State needs to bring in a veteran offensive play caller, much like they had
absolutely
2 years ago with Chip Kelly. I think, we saw, I think, realistically, promoting Brian Hartline was, intended to give him, those career advancement opportunities, intended to try to keep him happy, keep him on staff longer, because he's such an elite receivers coach, because he's such an elite recruiter. But I think, realistically, the results were just not there with Brian Hartline calling the offense over the course of a season compared to what it was with Chip Kelly a year ago. And so I think, Ryan Day, he needs to be able to be that true CEO. I think he was more involved, certainly in the Cotton Bowl and even over the course of a whole season, more involved hands-on with the offense this year than he had been a year ago. And I think you just look at what happened in 23 and then how great they were in 24 and what happened in 25. There's enough data now to make it clear that Ryan Day having to be hands-on with the offense all the time is not what's best for him as a head coach, is not what's best for this program. So I think it's important. We don't really know who that guy is going to be yet. That search is still ongoing, but for Ohio State to find it's Matt Patricia on offense, to find someone who can be really that head coach of the offense, allow Ryan Day to be that true CEO. Not that Ryan Day won't continue to have influence there, not that Ryan Day's offensive philosophies won't remain a big part of Ohio State's offensive philosophy, but I do think the play calling will improve when you have someone who has more play calling experience in that role versus this past year having a first-time play caller and then Brian Hartline and then Ryan Day ultimately having to do 2 jobs himself.
I'd be curious this offseason, too, if Ohio State realizes maybe some of the shortcomings of their game plan regarding the pace of the offense and just that they had this methodical approach all year with the offense, which we praised it because we knew that it was essentially saving them a game based on the wear and tear on their body, the amount of snaps that the offense had, the defense had this season. However, when you don't go the distance, did that really even matter, right? If you don't make it to the championship game, if you don't play in it and win it, does saving a game really matter? So I think that having that experience could open up the offense to some extent of, hey, we're going to push the agenda this upcoming season. We're going to get an extra 5 to 10 plays a game. And I have to imagine that that is something that entices Julian Sayin, another couple of throws, right? Bo Jackson, another couple of runs, Jeremiah Smith, another couple of targets on offense, and being able to dictate the pace that way. Because there's so many times this year where I think Ohio State had the opportunity to kind of, what did Ryan Day say? To kind of turn up the gas, right? Or to kind of let it loose. But we just never quite saw them get into that extra gear on offense. And I think I would like to see that. And I think Ohio State fans would as well. Just to see Ohio State get back to, okay, you have a really great defense. You're hoping that Matt Patricia is going to come back for another year as defensive coordinator. And you're hoping that that defense is going to be just as good as it was. If not that, maybe a little bit. Shouldn't, I guess, expect it to be generational, but still a top-ranked defense in the country. And to be able to see Ohio State have fun by kicking ass, right? Like that's what Ryan Day said this year. That's what fun is. And I, as I reflect on the season, I think Ohio State's year was great, right? They went undefeated. They went 12-0. But as I look back on some of their games, I wouldn't have said that they kicked ass from start to finish. And a lot of that has to do with the pace that they operated with on offense. I look at Indiana's schedule, and I know that it's Indiana. And I know they have to constantly beat the perception that they are Indiana and that they have to earn the respect of everyone across college football. But they're the favorites to win the national championship right now. When you look at some of their scores, they're beating Indiana State 73-0. They beat Illinois 63-10, UCLA 56-6, Maryland 55-10. Like those are some beat downs. And I think Ohio State, while they were never out of a game, they never even trailed until the Big Ten championship game. I wouldn't have said that from start to finish that the offense was just pounding it out there and that they really asserted their will. They really leaned on that defense to save themselves some of the wear and tear, hoping to make another championship run. But again, it doesn't really matter if you don't end up making the championship game and winning it all. Let's do one last question because I think this is a good one. It's actually pretty funny as well. Can 11 Warriors be Ohio State's patch sponsor? That's what comes from Oh Pretty Ricky. He says, can't think of many logos that would look as good as the 11W logo on an Ohio State uniform. So I'm going to be honest. Ricky. We do not have that kind of financial capabilities to be able to purchase what should be probably a multi-million-dollar patch sponsorship deal. But if we did have the money, I agree. There wouldn't be a better logo than the 11 Warriors logo to put on an Ohio State uniform.
Yeah, if they need to turn to journalism outlets to sponsor, that probably would not be a great sign for the market. But hey, would be pretty cool. I do want to make one more point too. That you were talking about the stuff about the pace of play, and we were talking a little bit before the show about the 2019 Ohio State Clemson game because of some comments that Steele Chambers and Bryson Shaw made on their podcast earlier this week. And we posted about that on 11warriors.com earlier today. But I was looking at the Pro Football Focus grades from that game just out of curiosity, because there was kind of talk like, who is this mystery player that Ryan Day admonished in the meeting? And the biggest thing that stuck out to me was Ohio State had 89 offensive snaps in that game. I don't think Ohio State came close to having 89 offensive snaps in a game this year. And especially with CFP having only 60, I think it was. I think that's where, like, you got it during a regular season, but, you know, there's that infamous quote now from November where Ryan Day said, when it's time to turn up the gas, we will. And in terms of pace, that just didn't happen in those last couple of games. And I mean, I think I turned to Chase in the press box and said it late in the first half. They were moving the ball with some tempo, and it's like, I'd like to see them continue to do this in the second half, and they just didn't do that. So I do think that, you know, going forward, I don't know that this you know, play really slow to preserve because the other part of it too, and honestly, it might be a factor in why they've lost some of these guys that they've lost here in the past week, is when you play really slow like that and you don't pull away from teams, you don't get your backups opportunities to play. Like, I think a lot of Buckeye fans would like to see them push the pace, get a big lead, and then take those starters out of a game. Like, be a little bit more aggressive in terms of like, okay, we're up by 28. We can take Julian Sayin out of the game. Get Lincoln Keenels or Tavian St. Clair in there to get some reps. I think there's other ways to limit reps beyond just playing slower. And I think like it made sense in the first game of the year against Texas when you really didn't know what you had yet with Julian saying because he hadn't played in the game. But I think as the year went along and Julian got more comfortable, you would have liked to see them. And granted, some of it may have been Ohio State really saying, we know our offensive line isn't that good. Like we just want to limit like the amount of exposure. Like we just feel like this is what gives us the best chance because we know we have some real flaws on this offense. But I think in an ideal world, you'd like to see them push the pace a little bit more offensively and, really kind of dictate the pace of games a little bit more than it felt like they were able to do this year.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And even with that offensive line part of it, like if you got more reps for them by playing more offensive plays and more offensive snaps, maybe that helps their development too. Just nothing replaces game reps. That's always a saying in football. So, lots of arguments for them to move at a faster pace next year.
Yeah. And I don't think that Ohio State all of a sudden needs to become, late 2000s, early 2010s, Oregon, Chip Kelly offensive line, right? I'm not asking for the offensive line to shrink down to the high 200s and low 300 pounds so that they can all be running at a high pace. But I do think that they would benefit, as you're saying, Andy, to having more reps and to be able to really push the foot down on the pedal and push the offense forward. I think that's a great, great statistic you bring up, Dan, because that 2019 team was so fun to watch and they produced at such a high level. Justin Fields, in many cases, didn't always play the entire game, but he ends up finishing with 41 touchdowns and 3 picks. Like he was a Heisman finalist along with Chase Young. And J.K. Dobbins was right there as well. And so you had guys producing at a very high level.
And by the way, even with that pace, was still the best defense in the country.
Yeah. And so I just think that a great question, by the way, from our forum. I just think that Ohio State, that's something we'll definitely have to unpack this offseason as we kind of address what adjustments can Ohio State make moving forward. We're certainly going to have to make some adjustments on 11warriors.com. We have been, as the transfer portal continues to unfurl with Ohio State players entering to go find their next destination, as a few of the players already have. Lincoln Keenels goes to Louisville, Bryce West goes to Wisconsin, and a few others. And we'll certainly be keeping up with all the updates and the transfer portal. A couple of Buckeyes still weighing the decision about whether or not they want to enter the NFL draft. But regardless, there will be plenty of content. Maybe Steel Chambers and Bryson Shaw will have another conversation on TikTok that we can be posting about as well. But Dan, Andy, thank you again for a great episode of 11 Warriors Live. The conversation was lots of fun. Thank you to anyone that joined on YouTube and Facebook and X and all your comments. But yeah, also want to give a shout out to First Bank of Central Ohio for sponsoring our videos at 11 Warriors this season. But for now, keep up with